This is our final session of the evening, so let's make it interactive. We've got this amazing system that you can seamlessly submit your questions, so please do that throughout the session. What I think is really interesting about this session is that we have a group of 3 people who 20 years ago would not be in the same building, let alone the same room. Very different audiovisual industries, construction, architecture. Okay, you two maybe, but but now these industries are all using overlapping tools and overlapping with each other in kind of some interesting ways. Now, I want to drill into that a little bit as we move on, but I think first, just to get it as concrete as possible, because we're talking about, you know, all these different new technologies. So I'd like to start with you, Ged, the chief. Sorry, what's your? If you can remind me of your job title.
Managing
It's
Director.
behind me, Chief. Oh, excuse me. Now, you've been talking to me in the green room about the way that your industry is being completely revolutionised by all sorts of new types of new technology. In terms of your sort of daily bread and butter, what are the actual tools we're talking about that have been most transformative, and how are they being employed?
So it was touched on by some of the earlier speakers. I think probably the biggest change for us is the way we operate, particularly in the world of design, and increasingly that now moves forward into the world of manufacture. So I suppose we go back historically, the way the industry used to be, going back way back when, architects would design a building with their design colleagues. That information would be passed across to the builder, then we'd go out there and build that building. That's now changed, and what we're finding now is those boundaries are no longer there as boundaries. There's very much an overlap with the architects, where we're able to bring our expertise through the supply chain and the specialists who are now quite skilled within the elements of design, and whilst protecting the architectural intent, are able to work with the architects to help take that design forward. So we're now moved a long way now into that design sphere where perhaps historically we didn't used to be.
So it's more integrated. Well, I think there is an interesting parallel with your work there, Mike, because of course Framestore, when you started, I mean, back in the 80s, it was more of a post-production house. So it's about, you know, taking images and doing something with them afterwards. Whereas now it's not just the tools you use to create audiovisual imagery. It's also the entire process is being completely upended in terms of when you get involved, if I'm right in assuming that.
Yes, so I suppose when we started the business 37 years ago now, it was very much somebody would shoot something, they'd give us the film material, and then we would enhance it with computer graphics or with graphic layers. Today, the technology now allows us to go way beyond that, to actually conceive the ideas, to imagine them, to build worlds and environments that you can stand within, to use technology like VR and AR to put yourselves inside sets before they're built, to then design from the inside out, and then to make creatures and environments that can look seamlessly real, but using computer technology. So our job or our interaction in the creative process goes from the very earliest stage of concept. In fact, studios will quite often come to us with scripts before they're even greenlit internally and ask us to show them what they will look like, to imagine the colors, the ambience, the action that might be within a sequence, so that they can then compete within the studio for which film gets greenlit. So being involved in every stage of the creative process makes our world a much more creatively satisfying place to be, but also means that we have to have also a huge range of skills. So we have physicians, mathematicians, computer scientists and engineers teamed up with people like myself, who's a graphic designer. We have photographers, directors and writers, and it's that combination of science and art that make us able to do what we do.
Well, we actually already have a question that touches on that sheer variety of skills, but I think I'd like to bring Miranda in first. Now, we were talking earlier, and I understand actually you have some anxieties, reservations about the extreme rapidity and acceleration of tech tools within architecture. And what's the area which, within your own practice at Morris+Company, you've seen most transformed in recent years?
I think what's been really, really useful is probably talking Autodesk CEO, is the kind of understanding what our current design processes are and how we can use that time more valuably. And I think that what we've managed to do is also what I think we're sort of touching on is sort of stages of design. So previously, kind of go through various stages, there might be quite a bit of waste, you then review that, you then assess it, you get another discipline in, they'd say redo it, you've done it wrong, go back. I think now we're realising that through sort of digital processes, we're able to front end a lot of that, and that is very much about creating scripts that you can overlay, or very fancy Excel spreadsheet, or plugins that we're adding into Revit that are actually designed for the way that we want to be designing what we want to be doing. So, for example, we can take a site now, and this is all relatively new for us in the sense of myself, someone that's not so technically savvy, can though very quickly sort of do a quick SketchUp model, have a plug-in, review the embodied carbon and operational carbon at a high level about how the orientation, form factor, etc. is affecting that design. So that's already just meaning that we're making more sensible, meaningful decisions of the kind of quality of the kind of questions we want to ask ourselves as designers. So I guess where I see the huge value is when it's really about really a helpful tool that we want to have already, and it's just being a bit more efficient and more front end with it. But the most important question always is just like, why? Why are we using that? Why do we have that data? And I guess that's where hopefully the designers are still very critical to that.
And just to pick up on Ged's point, are you finding a greater interaction with the developers and construction companies throughout the process? I think
we're starting to, aren't we? Because I think back. I'm just echoing what I'm sorry, I've forgotten his name. The big man, the CEO, is that the Andrew. Thank you. Is at the moment I'd say there's sort of the legal issues, the PI issues. I think that we have the ability, don't we? Sort of the Revit model is very quite intelligent. There is means in which you can share that. But at the moment, I don't think there is actually the kind of, I think we're all still in the test bedding era, and I think once the lawyers get in the PI insurance and we start seeing case studies about this, but the abilities are there, and we can see it much better when, for example, we're novated to a contractor, when we're working with a contractor later, where we really are sharing that because they become our client. So we then work in a much more sort of dynamic way, and then you can really see that benefits. I think there is these kind of stages and legal implications that need to be tested out to really get that proper collaboration that we all probably desperately need.
Well, you did kind of touch on the big question there, which is why, which is something I hope we're going to have a chance to look through. Mike, one of the things I think is interesting about the audiovisual industry is it's really not the most obvious thing that springs to mind when people worry about concerns with sustainability. You see people laying a wall of, well, they don't lay walls of bricks anymore, seeing people pouring concrete. You think, what's the footprint of that? But of course, we all companies need to work with that. Has, aside from allowing you a more sophisticated product, has your recent changes in working practices enabled that in any way?
Yes, during the pandemic, it's a very relevant case in point, is that we weren't able to travel, so we weren't able to go on location and film. Literally, all production pretty much stopped during pandemic. So a lot of our clients were then turning to us as a trusted partner and saying, how can we continue to make content when we can't go anywhere? And so one of the solutions for that was to use LED screens like we have behind us here. And instead of using a blue screen, we would generate content in the computer that could then be placed on the screen. And then we could transport people literally to other worlds or other parts of the world through computer-generated imagery on a screen and make much more sustainable content and lowering the carbon footprint by doing it all in one place. And we actually shot a whole 8-part Netflix series in that way called 1899. And it was all filmed in a big volume studio with 260-degree panoramic screen and a giant turntable that could hold 52 tons in weight so that we could rotate the sets and leave the cameras in one position. So a huge amount of innovation went into work out how to continue working, but has also produced a very sustainable new process.
Now, staying on the issue of sustainability, because of course the kind of sustainability you're talking about is completely vital. Everyone needs to reduce their carbon footprint. At the same time, there are broader interpretations of what sustainability might be. Socially sustainable construction and development needs to be socially sustainable if it's not going to, exacerbate unaffordability, for example. That could cause all sorts of problems down the line, which means that practices have to change. Do you think, either of you, do you think that they're useful tools for creating a more socially sustainable production, a more socially sustainable form of design, or do you think that they sort of pose potential obstacles or fail to really address that? I suppose I'll start with Ged, just because we haven't heard from you for a bit.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps I can just answer that slightly differently. I think probably the more pressing issue for us is the right here, right now. So I think, you may have to talk a bit more about the social impact, but I think, the construction industry and the built environment produces 40% of global emissions. So we have a responsibility to try and address that. And some very obvious things are, over 50% of all the waste produced in the UK by weight comes from the construction industry. So we are very, very wasteful in terms of the way we currently build. And that's because a lot of what we do, the way designs evolve and the way we actually assemble them is very traditional. So packets of plasterboard are delivered to site, lengths of pipework are sort of delivered to site, and things are then cut and adapted on site, and the waste then goes in the skip and disappears from the site. So what we need to do with the use of technology is we need to standardize things more and make sure they are repeatable. So we can move much more to that manufacturing type model. Now that means working with the designers, because it's quite important that we do produce these fantastic buildings, but the bits that sit behind it can be repeatable. And it does require that manufacturing-based approach, because we're a very inefficient industry still. I mean, the manufacturing industry had a 6.5-fold increase in productivity compared to the construction industry over the last 10 years. So it shows this huge opportunity for us. And I think working with skilled designers and informed clients, if we can get that repetition of standardization using a kit of parts, then we can revolutionize the industry, and certainly then in terms of carbon, we can vastly reduce it. And I think adding to that, what we also have responsibility is to look at the assets that already exist, and this is happening. We have to stop talking about demolition contractors and talk about reclamation contractors, salvaging the items from the building, how they can be reused and repurposed, how you can keep the assets that actually exist, and the industry start to make sort of great strides into that space.
Very true. Miranda?
Yeah, very good. I think it's this balance of both, isn't it, in terms of the environmental or operational and embodied carbon. So just to reiterate that we're doing similar things. We're plugging into Revit to get materials within our 3D modeling. We can look at the embodied content of that, and we make decisions based on it's data informing and helping us with our design. Obviously, social sustainability critical, because what's the point in building anything then if it's not going to be socially sustainable? And I think the best thing that probably all architects and builders could do would do nothing, I suppose. That's one thing as well. There's an element of we've got enough existing buildings, we've got enough things, we've got a hell of a lot of waste, how can we reuse, what can we do? But actually the social sustainability is where there's a huge question mark. So for example, we're in a massive housing crisis. Doing nothing doesn't seem like a very good response on that end. So it's this balance always of trying to work out how you can do something as environmentally friendly as possible, but as resilient and long-term, and be really sort of helping people at the moment. We've got a terrible homelessness crisis, for example. We need to act now, so we need to get homes built.
Absolutely. No, you're talking about, in many ways, that there is some sort of positive potential there. To come back to this question we've got from the audience, actually for you, Mike, in terms of the potential positive input, will AI solve some of the skill shortage issues that the BFX and post-production industry has?
Absolutely. I think the concept of smaller teams and having some of the craft work that we at the moment put a lot of people onto, things like cutting or rotoscoping, drawing around something to cut it off a background to put it onto another. Some of these processes can be automated. Finding ways to speed up rendering times and to be able to iterate quicker and to be more efficient then in the way that we process our images, or make for us to be, to be more productive and to do it at a cheaper cost level. We were talking about the demand for more content. I think during a time of recession, there's always a greater demand on us to produce more content. During the pandemic, we saw streaming services go through the ceiling, and every maker of content or IP owner wanted to make something. And there just wasn't enough capacity. So for us, AI is going to assist. It will inspire, as was mentioned earlier, but it will be a great tool for allowing the creative people to concentrate more on the creative process and free up people from doing some of the heavy lifting, the grunt work.
Okay. To go back into that, I'd be interested to just pick up on something Andrew said, that said that designers are not going to be losing their jobs. Of course, one door closes, another one opens. We know that these processes are dynamic. Do you share that optimism?
I think to a degree, in the sense that, as hopefully for the reasons that I've said, I think the kind of what are we doing it for? In the end, we're still designing for humans and the planet that require humans to make those decisions. But I am a little bit nervous, because I think that a lot of the idea, I think that Andrew was saying about how the process of drawing isn't necessarily something, it's the expression of, sort of grunt work, or it's not necessary. I find that complicated, because I completely understand kind of repetitive simple behavior, but actually the art sometimes of the making of the process can also inform how then you're designing and how you're understanding that object, or how those kit of parts come together, or so I think the process of making and designing informs really good quality design. So I think there's some balance there that needs to be found. And I'm a little bit concerned that it could be that it's all kind of, well, we don't need to do that. We can step back and all become sort of design critiques, but rather than necessarily getting into. So I have a slight concern that less isn't always more, but perhaps that's just my feeling. I don't know. I'm sure you're going to completely disagree with me, aren't you?
I mean, I'm interested to hear what your take on that is. I mean, you're not specifically, you're more in the delivery, though that's of course enormously complex, and as you pointed out, you're integrated into the design process. But in your section of the process, what are the roles that you see expanding, and what are the roles you see contracting? Or is there some obstacle towards that process that still needs to remove before we get to the future?
I mean, if we're talking about general skills, I think we're going to be looking more for multi-skilled individuals as opposed to specialists. And this whole concept I just talked about, if we can get the kit of parts right, then we're going to be more about assembling things on site rather than having to use highly skilled, very well-paid craftsmen to actually create things on site. If we get this right, what it means is we can then use semi-skilled labour in a manufacturing environment rather than highly skilled labour on site. And of course, with the advent of technology, everyone has to increasingly upskill themselves. So those who can't move with the times are going to find themselves in a situation where they're not with the rest of the industry. That potentially vulnerable situation. But as an industry, we are sort of got an aging demographic anyway. So I think we're going to see a lot of new people coming into the industry over the next few years anyway. Yeah.
Okay. Almost finished already. That was quick. I suppose maybe just a last question then is that if you've had to or rejoiced in adapting to all these different new tools, what is the one thing that you yearn for that is still lacking? If I just had that, and it's something, I mean, what would it be? You can say nothing if it's nothing. Don't worry.
I actually think we'll probably I probably need to talk to Andrew about it, don't I? Because I think that if, for example, Revit, we're spending a lot of our energy creating. I think he was saying that there's a pull now, because now we're realising what the abilities of that is, and I think we just need it to have sort of more. ability to have these sort of data within it already. So, for example, we're putting in a hell of a lot of time and sort of plugins and things to try and get it, and we're investing in this research ourselves. Then we're sharing it with all of our consultants and members. So that's happening a lot, which is fantastic. But I think maybe that could be done already. So that would be very useful. So
Okay.
I'll talk to him later.
Okay.
I suppose my desire is really we want to be able to do things quicker and more efficiently. And that involves taking out lots of things, I think, removing process that isn't necessary, that whole sort of way we look at the building environment and that more collaborative approach that we are seeing, but I think there's more that can be done in that space.
And,
For me, I suppose it's yes, we want to do things quicker. We want to be more productive. We want to be more creative. But I've noticed over the past few years how a collective team of creative people has suddenly all been sent home. Everybody is now back in their bedrooms. And how do we bring those creative teams back together again in a way that is as engaging and rewarding and educational as it used to be? There was a process for climbing the ladder and learning from your peers, and there's something in a shared community being creative together that I struggle with sometimes when everybody is on flat screens a long way away from each other. So it's looking for that way to bring back that culture of caring and embracing the fun of what we do, and also doing everything else we've just mentioned.
yes. I think a lot of us feel that way, that there's something that there's some sort of link in the chain that if it hasn't been broken, it's all a little thin, and we'd like to sort of reconnect that a little bit more strongly. I'm afraid that's actually all we've got time for. Very interesting just to hear all your different viewpoints. So thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.